Hello, Kansas and Western fans. Today it's time for another How I Do Stuff video, and for that we're going to do how I solder rail joints. I solder practically all my rail joints. I'm in a climate-controlled basement with good humidity control, so I'm not worried too much about humidity or anything like that, or expansion or contraction. So just to ensure proper electrical conductivity across all rail joints, I solder them all. So I'm going to show you how I do that. It's not really different than probably a lot of people, but if you're curious on how I do certain things, this is another video in that series to just show you what I do. So first of all, I'll show you the materials that I'm using. I've got the soldering iron, which is a little better than your standard soldering iron. I can't remember where I got this. I think I might have gotten it at Harbor Freight. It wasn't super expensive, but it is nice to have a good solid base to put your iron into, especially, because it's hot and you don't want it to fall or anything like that. And then to have an actual temperature control is also handy. And you can see that flashing LED light. That tells me that it's reached the temperature that I need. And you can see that heat setting that I've got it set at is not quite maxed out, but almost. You want your soldering iron very hot so it works fast, and then you reduce the risk of melting any ties. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on this joint right here. And I forgot to show the rest of the stuff here. Sorry. Got my flux, which there's definitely a lot of debate about whether or not that's necessary. In my experience, it just makes it easier. It makes the solder flow a lot quicker, and that's what you want when you're working with HO scale track that has plastic ties. You want it to be done quickly so you don't melt those ties. And then I just have some electronic solder, which this is semi-thick for electronic solder. There is a thinner one that you can get. It's a little bit stiffer. This is the one that I've been using for my entire layout, and I like it just fine. So that's that. And then got a Q-tip and some paint thinner for cleaning, and a Bright Boy just in case that's necessary. But we'll go over all that later. Okay, so we're gonna get started here. I'm gonna put the camera down so you can watch how I apply, if I can find a spot for it, watch how I apply this flux. And I'm just use a toothpick, and you don't want to get too much on there because it just makes a mess later on and more to clean up, but just a little dab. And I only put it on the outside of the joint because you don't want to risk having any solder on the inside and create some problems with your flanges on your wheels. So just a little bit there and a little bit on the other side. And I just try to spread it as evenly as I can. It's not the easiest material to work with. Not a big deal. And if I get a lot on the tops of the rails, I'll just wipe it down with my finger, just because it makes it easier to clean up later. All right, with that in place, and I already showed you my iron is hot, I just make sure that I have a decent amount of solder out so I don't burn myself. And then make sure you have a clean tip, of course. That's pretty clean, even though I haven't used this in a while. It's nice and silver, not too chunky or anything like that. And then I'll melt the flux first. Obviously it's going to smoke if you've never soldered before. That's just part of the process. And then once I've heated it up, and there's no really good judge, it's just experience that tells you how much it's heated, I'll touch the solder to the joint, and I try to stay off the top of the railhead, and then I just kind of dip iron. This is still apparently not that hot, but you see once it is hot, it starts to flow, and then it just sucks right up against the rail webbing. And that's a pretty good solder joint there. You don't want anything sticking out. That way when you come back and paint it later, it'll just blend right in, and you won't even be able to tell any difference. Now with the back side, and you can see here's what a dirty tip looks like. It's got some black on it. So that's when I use my little cleaning station here, and I just stab it in there a few times, and then you've got a clean tip again. Anyway, back to the track. For the other side, I'll put a little kink into the solder so it points back at the rail, just to make sure, it's because I can't really see. I can't lean over to see what I'm doing. So I just kind of find the webbing with my tip, and you can see the smoke is working, so you know you're melting that flux. And then again, just kind of touch the tip to the solder. You've got some, you can see that chunk come out. And you'll see it flow through the other side because it's filling that gap between both the rails and the rail joiner. And this is again why I solder my joints, is there is still a gap in that rail joiner, and that can get filled with corrosion or whatnot. So that's, you can see that solder flow through both sides, but it just stays down there by the rail joiner. And that's why you don't want to use too much solder, so you don't have too much to get rid of later. But that's how quick and easy that is. Now we're going to let this cool off a little bit, and I'll come back and show you how I clean that joint. All right, so let this cool off a little bit. Now you can see I've laid my track on extruded foam, and you can see the heat will dent that foam. It will melt it quick. So that's another reason to go fast, but I'm not worried about it because that's all going to get painted. It's going to get filled with ballast, so it's just not a concern for me that it's got those little dents in the foam. But you can see that my ties haven't been melted. I know a lot of people use heat sinks on either side of the joints just to make sure it doesn't happen. I just haven't found that necessary. But I certainly don't discourage that practice. But you can see how smooth that joint looks, which is amazing because I haven't done any soldering for several months, so yay for me. Anyway, so what I have now is I've got my paint thinner out and a Q-tip, and this is really no different a process than I would use for cleaning track in general, especially after it's been painted. If I want to clean the tops off, and I just get that Q-tip wet and soaked, and then I'm just rubbing it back and forth across the rail heads, and you can see it's starting to pull that extra flux that didn't melt off. And that's what all you want to do is clean that top of the rail head so it's a nice and clean surface for electrical conductivity for your locomotives. And you can feel when it is clean because it doesn't stick anymore. That flux is really sticky, and once you've got it cleaned off well enough, you can feel it with your finger too. It's just nice and smooth. And then we'll get a little bit more and do this other one. Now, typically when I do soldering like this, I'll also do feeders on the same section of track just to get it all done in one soldering work session. I'm just doing this one for this video, but I am going to come back and show another video on how I do my feeders. But for now, we're just going to finish cleaning this off until it's nice and smooth. And yeah, these Q-tips will shed a little bit of hair, but that's not a big deal. Trying not to use the Bright Boy. I've seen multiple videos how you don't want to use an abrasive on rails because it just encourages further corrosion. But if there's a tough spot of dirt on the track, and you can see this looks fairly good, I'll just go ahead and hit it with the Bright Boy real quick just to make sure. Just wipe that clean, and then I'll come back and test that joint once I have feeders on this spur to make sure everything looks good and works well. So that's how I solder my rail joints. Hope that's helpful to you. Thanks for watching.